So you're trying out healing in Final Fantasy XIV for the first time. I know it can seem daunting knowing the team's life is mostly in your hands, but frankly, once you get the hang of things, you'll find that it's really not that stressful, at least not most of the time. You'll sooner be sighing or cursing at the DPS who died to a completely avoidable attack than you'll be thinking you're not a good enough healer. So let's get to some tips that can help you get accustomed to Final Fantasy XIV healing. First of all, I want to stress that you really need to approach learning this at your most comfortable pace. I say that with any job, but with healing in particular, it's probably the most important. Healing, if you can even call it that in Final Fantasy XIV, is very different and definitely needs to be approached step by step. So take it slow and let your parties know that you're new or still learning. So step one should be obvious. You need to get used to what your healing spells actually do. Early on in the game, you'll feel like a traditional healer somewhat. You'll have a few single target heals, a few AoE heals, and you'll use those in the appropriate situations. If there's one person taking damage, you cure them. Everyone's taking damage, do an AoE heal. It's a good basis to start with, but it does evolve quite a bit as you level up. Once you start passing level 50 plus or so, you'll really start to notice you're getting a lot more instant heals and a lot of different types of AoE and direct heals, and with that, how you actually approach healing should start to change. Look for opportunities to use these spells and abilities in place of casting those heals that you've been using throughout the early game. Quite frankly, I don't even use things like Cure 1 or Physic later in the game. Heck, I don't even use Medica 1 when I'm healing on White Mage. You just get so many efficient tools that taking the time to learn to use those makes your life that much easier. Once you're a bit more comfortable with healing, step 2 is to start dealing damage. Final Fantasy XIV is a game that very much encourages its healers to contribute to damaging enemies. Hey, everything dies faster, the less healing you need. Fortunately, healers are really simple when it comes to introducing their damage tools. They all have one damage over time spell, one direct damage spell, and one AoE spell. You do get some extra stuff depending on the job, like a Size or Flatus Misery on White Mage, Energy Drain on Scholar, and your Star on Astro. Now, maximizing on this stuff will come later. That's not that important unless you're really going into hardcore endgame stuff. But for now, you just want to be looking for places where you don't really feel like you need to be casting heals and start casting DPS abilities during that time. Maybe the tank isn't taking that much damage, maybe there's no AoEs hitting the party, so you want to throw out a damage over time spell or your single target spell. On big AoE pulls, throw out your AoE spells if you find that the tank just really doesn't need any more healing. White Mage's Holy in particular is pretty nice since it's an AoE stun as well. Really helps the tanks reduce damage on those large pulls. Honestly, the more comfortable you get, the more you're going to be using these spells, you're going to notice that you just don't have to cast that many heals in a lot of the content in the game. You'll use your instant cast and off global heals to actually take care of people, and all your global cooldowns, or almost all of them, are going to be damaging spells. It's a reason why people who have played 14 for quite some time refer to the healer role as green DPS. This is something you really need to work up to though, and at the end of the day, keeping the party alive is more important than that glare you want to cast. Just need to make sure that you can earn casting that glare by understanding the rest of the stuff you have. So how do we get that much more efficient with our healing so that we can cast all of these additional DPS spells? Well, the big thing you're going to be working on is something called overhealing. Overhealing means that you're healing people for more than the amount of HP they're missing. This means that the mana being spent on the healing is wasted, and potentially the entire global cooldown could be going to waste. If a tank took one auto attack from a monster, and they're only missing a little bit of health, you don't need to immediately cure them up after that. You may not need to do anything to them for quite some time, because you have these instant cast abilities that you're picking up as you go throughout the game. So it's really understanding when you actually need to heal versus just spamming healing every possible time somebody loses health. How you go about learning that though is going to be dependent on what kind of content you're doing. When you're first starting out, you're probably doing dungeons or normal mode difficulty stuff, and that really doesn't present a lot of frequent threats to the party, assuming people aren't being hit by things they're not supposed to, and trust me, I understand, they often do get hit by those things. This lets you practice a few basics when it comes to minimizing your healing output and tightening up efficiency. For example, let's say the boss hits the team with an AoE, but there's not going to be a lot more damage on the party for an extended period of time. Instead of casting that AoE heal, maybe just use one of your instant AoE heals. Maybe throw down a Scholar Sacred Soil or an Asylum and let that heal over time restore everyone's health instead of rushing to top everybody off immediately. Basically, as you learn fights, you want to learn where the urgency to restore HP is so you don't just rush to spam cast AoE heals. You try to see if maybe one of your abilities or maybe two abilities will do the trick instead. That's one of the big reasons I don't really use Medica 1 much as a healer. Medica 2 is this large heal that gives everyone a heal over time so they can regenerate their health over time. If I need a big direct heal that's an AoE, normally people will stack up to use Cure 3, and that's incredibly efficient. And again, those are the kind of things we're looking for. Now, as you move up into more difficult content, you do need to consider those abilities more carefully. You can't just throw them out here or there because you may want certain abilities for certain situations. Now, there are things you can do that are kind of standard. Perhaps you want to consider throwing out a single target instant cast or ability on tanks for tank busters. I know on Scholar, before a pull, I like to throw Recitation and XCOG on the tank, so I don't need to worry about healing them for quite some time. It lets me just focus on DPS as soon as the fight actually begins. Or maybe you're on White Mage and you want to throw a Divine Benison on the tank right before they get hit by that big tank buster, just to reduce the damage and reduce the amount of healing that you actually need to do. On Astro, learn to set up stars or horoscopes in advance of the damage that actually happens. You basically need a little bit of foresight to make that work. But that's going to be a big thing, is thinking about the damage that the party is about to take as opposed to worrying about the damage after it's already been done. This again just requires experience and knowledge, so it's not something you'll know how to do right off the bat, but it's something that if you're thinking about really helps accelerate how much you understand healing in Final Fantasy XIV. Now, that's not to say that healing doesn't have its panic moments, but a lot of the times with more experience, it'll come with other people's mistakes. See that DPS that dies on the same mechanic every time, and then you go to resurrect them and they die again, and again, and again, and again. And again, you get it, yeah. Speaking of which, if you are a healer, you now have a resurrection in your kit. Please understand that for 5 seconds after you're resurrected, so long as you do not take any actions, including sprint, you are actually invulnerable to most attacks in the game, which can be used to reposition, make sure you don't die to a big AoE, and the such. If you use any actions, it will be removed, but you can still move around while you actually have that Transcendence buff up. Getting back to people making mistakes that make your life miserable as a healer, getting tanks that don't understand how to use cooldowns, or maybe people outranging your heals by standing way out in the west when you really need them to be standing in range of you. It's something that happens a lot. People not standing in your asylum so they don't get the healing benefits from it, not standing in soils, not standing in stars. You really start to notice that people sabotage themselves without you even thinking about it. So as a healer, just think about those core principles. Start by understanding how your heal spells work, integrate DPS as you become comfortable, and then start taking your experience and learn how to foresee the damage that's going to be coming instead of just reacting to it in a panic. That will allow you to make better use of your mitigation tools, your healing that requires timing, your heal over time, and reduce your overhealing altogether, giving you plenty of time to dish out that damage on top of everything. Now, while you can follow those basics, I do have some more pieces of advice. The first one is role actions. I feel like a lot of people just skip over these, and they're really, really important in Final Fantasy XIV. Lucid Dreaming on healers is a must. You should be using it on cooldown for MP, even after just a few casts into most fights. Swift Cast is great for a number of things, but you'll most of the time be using it to raise people. Sure Cast should be on the ready to deal with any knockback mechanics that it actually works on. If you mitigate a knockback with Sure Cast, you're also making sure you can continue casting. Effective. Asuna should be kept at the ready to deal with any debuffs. If you ever see a debuff on the party list or on a player with that little line on the top of it, that means it can be removed with Asuna. Keep a close eye out for these kind of debuffs when you're first getting accustomed to the game. Rescue, while it can be used to troll your friends, not that I know anything about that, though seriously, it can be used to save people who are out of position, especially when you know a fight and they don't. Just try not to grief people. You will probably get reported for this. Sometimes you'll even get reported if you use it properly, so maybe just leave it for raids when you trust the people you're playing with. Oh, and repose? It's nice while you're leveling out in the world. Maybe you accidentally aggro something or you want to cheese a leave quest or something, but it's rarely used in dungeons. In exploration content like Eureka and Bozja, or even with enemies in deep dungeons like Palace of the Dead or Heaven on High, it can be super useful for dealing with accidental monster pulls or just to pull off some really high skill stuff. Then you have movement. Being a caster, healers of course have to struggle with high movement scenarios. You want to save instant cast spells and abilities to deal with moments where you need to do a lot of movement. Try to time applying dots on opponents with times you need to move, or use instant global cooldowns if you have them available. If you're really skilled and you trust the team won't die when you do it, you could swift cast a spell to create more movement opportunities. I find that whenever I do this though, people die immediately after. Just my luck. Targeting is another big thing. People find all sorts of ways to make for more comfortable targeting, whether they're on controller or keyboard and mouse. I'm a classic keyboard and mouse player and I click the party frames in order to heal people, but you do have other options. For one, I just use a lot of AoE spells. I rarely have to target individual people to use a lot of my skills, but that comes with a lot of time and experience. Mouse over macros allow you to simply mouse over a name and execute an action on a target. While it's nice in theory for your healing spells, it does cause your spells to be less responsive due to the way the game's spell queuing works. You can basically press spells, skills, and abilities within half a second before actually activating them, and the server will remember that you pressed that and you can basically eliminate any latency with your decision making. But when you use a macro, that entire thing is completely removed, regardless of what job or role we're talking about. So this type of targeting requires very precise knowledge about how to time spellcasts, so that might not be something that's new player friendly. You also might want an easier way of placing your ground target spells, such as Asylum or Soil. This type of macro is perfect for things like that. It will place the spell at the target's location, but if you have no selected target, it'll place it at your own feet. It's great for all kinds of players, keyboard and mouse and controllers alike. Now, while I could continue on and on, there's so many little specific things I could cover for all the different healers here. I think I should just get to the point and say that the most important thing of all is to just make sure you're making your progress a little bit at a time. You won't be an expert right off the bat, and nobody should expect that of you. Work your way into using more DPS spells, but make sure you're still keeping people alive. Honestly, I also maybe recommend trying the other roles. If you've never played a tank or you've never played a DPS, try those because it actually helps widen your perspective on healing. It really helps understanding when DPS and tanks take damage on some fights and how they deal with it from a first-person perspective. Then you understand how to heal those situations a whole lot better. So it's a really valuable thing to do. However, with that, I will wrap up this video before we go any further. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned because we will be getting into more of these so you want to play certain roles in Final Fantasy XIV videos, and maybe a little bit more advanced stuff as we get closer to Endwalker's release. But with that, thank you for watching, I'll see you all in the next one, and until then, take care.